And we are recording. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're at. I'm Sean. I'm going to be moderating today's meeting. Why don't we get directly into the announcements? So there's a deadline tomorrow on production readiness soft freeze. So you have one more day until that. I think this is a newer deadline on releases. I hadn't seen this before. Manche, do you have more information on a production readiness soft freeze?
It's not a hard thing that you need to do, but the product, so for every enhancement you're working on, you are required to pass a production readiness review. The team responsible for those is asking to let them know ahead of time so that they have sufficient time to go through all the caps. The group of people responsible for those is rather tight. That's why they introduced this particular deadline. So it would be good to get them at least aware that there is a cap you're working on by tomorrow, so that they can keep they can plan ahead and have folks assigned to appropriate caps, so they will be able to manage it before the next week's deadline.
Great, thanks. And with that, we actually have the enhancement freeze that is a week later, next Thursday, next February 3rd. And we should all keep in mind the code freeze, which is at the end of March on March 29th. So with that, does anybody else have any other announcements they'd like to bring up in our meeting? Okay, why don't we move on to introductions? This is the part where we'd like to, if you're comfortable, please introduce yourself. If you are new to the SIG CLI or haven't been here for a while, we'd love to see and hear from people who are new to our meeting or returning. Would anybody like to introduce themselves? Okay. With that, let's move. We'll move on to the topics. So Katrina had a couple of topics, and I'm not seeing Katrina as a participant.
She's running a little late. Maybe we could do the other topics and then circle back.
Great. Yeah, that sounds like a good idea. So I'll move on to the SIG CLI util, or the CLI utils overview. So there was a Slack discussion with Antoine and Katrina about pruning. And so the CLI utils, this particular library came up. And so I wanted to, at least in this meeting, give a quick overview of CLI utils and maybe answer a couple of questions. The CLI utils is a kube control apply library. Hello. Darn it. Am I still?
You're still on the agenda.
Okay, great. So yeah, I just got a pop-up saying I'd been signed out. Oops. Okay, great. I'm still here. So the CLI utils library is a kube control apply library. It's a wrapper. Since we were able to move the kube control apply code, or we're able to import it now because we've moved all of the code into staging. One of the experiments that we played around with is, what if we tried to make some enhancements to kube control apply? And we did it in CLI utils. And the first enhancement that we did was to try to fix or try to do pruning in a better way, because we know that that kube control apply prune has some significant deficiencies. And the experiment that we wanted to do was very major. It uses an entirely different object called an inventory object to keep track of previously applied objects. And so, this was such a major change. It didn't really make sense to do it in kube control or to even try to I mean, kube control is just far too important and mature to be and to keep it stable. And so in the CLI utils, we have an experiment with kube control apply to do automatic pruning with this brand new architecture. And so I'm going to open it up now for any questions. Again, this was brought up in a Slack channel. I just wanted to make sure that everybody in this SIG is aware of what we're doing here, and give you guys an opportunity. To be honest, the documentation isn't up to speed right now, but you can ask me some questions now, and we will get the documentation up to date as soon as we can. I hope that didn't confuse anybody. I just wanted to give a quick overview and to let everybody know what's going on here, since this is SIG CLI repository.
Thanks, Sean. I do have some questions. Can you hear me okay?
Okay, great.
Yeah. What brought this up for me was thinking about the compatibility between the existing pruning feature, which is in a sort of a perma alpha state, which we don't love, hence your project, and the server-side apply feature. So I noticed in the code that pruning relies on the client-side annotation, and server-side apply has its own field. So I would see that as long as the pruning flag is there, I would see that as a blocker to switching to server-side by default, for example, or ultimately to removing the client-side apply implementation, if that's something we ever want to do, because that is a feature, as much as we might not love it and think that it has a lot of drawbacks in the implementation as it is today, it is something that people rely on. So
Right.
I would see that as a barrier. So I'm wondering if this project can be used to help us move forward on that angle.
So this project is so different, which is why it's in its own repo, that it's not, I don't see it actually being pulled into kube control anytime soon, if at all. I think it was more just to get some, we pull whatever learnings we have and try to re-implement in kube control if we decide to go down that route. So let me quickly go over some of, you brought up some really good points, and what I want to go over is pruning in general. And what is apply prune? Apply prune is automatic deletion of objects when you do an apply. And the way that it does this is that it knows which particular objects you had previously applied. So it says, here's my currently set of applied objects, and I know what I had previously applied. And if I'm applying something and it's not in the current set, and it was in the previous set, then we automatically clean it up. We automatically delete it. We automatically prune it. So the big question then is, how do we define what that set of previously applied objects is? And the current implementation is with labels, which is kind of a canonical way that we do things in Kubernetes with identifying sets of objects. There are such significant drawbacks with using labels to create and identify a set of objects that pruning is in alpha state and will probably never be beta. And some of those drawbacks are, you have to when you're identifying, you're using labels, you have to identify the specific GVKs. And actually in Prune right now, we hard code which GVKs are available. It doesn't work with CRDs, for example, or custom resources out of the box. You actually have to use a flag called the Prune whitelist in order to be able to prune with CRDs. In addition, you have to specify a namespace along with when you're identifying with these labels. And so if you prune to a completely new namespace, it will not prune because it only knows to prune based on the current namespace. I'm not sure if any of that made sense. Anyway, there's significant drawbacks to our current implementation of pruning. And so what we decided was to experiment to see if we could build something where we keep track of the previously applied objects in what we call an inventory object. It contains a whole bunch of references to what's been previously applied. And so, so you brought up a bunch of really good questions, and I guess my answer right now is that we are so far away from, taking whatever we've learned and built in this CLI utils and, be able to use it for kube control. I honestly think it would be, years before we would get, anything that we've learned from this into kube control. So the central problem to be solved in order to make progress on pruning is how are we going to identify the previous set of objects? We know labels doesn't work now, and we're experimenting with an inventory object, which is one of the objects you apply has a special label called with an inventory ID. So it's recognized to be the place where we store references to all the other objects that are being applied. But that's such a major change from kube control now, and we're so conservative with what we do with kube control. I don't see us actually making progress there, if ever. Yeah, I'm not sure if I'm going to stop there because I've said a lot, and I'm going to open it back up to questions. Specifically to Katrina. Did I answer any of your questions?
Yeah, that does give me a better idea. I have some follow-ups though. For example, like the one of the problems that you mentioned that we have is the situation where kube control is actually operating on multiple namespaces at once, and the pruning won't follow. How do you solve that if your tracking object is a namespaced object?
So that only, I think that only applies for, it doesn't apply to cluster scoped objects. So like cluster scoped objects, so first of all, automatically pruning a namespace is like probably a really bad idea. But I'd have to look at the apply code, the apply prune code, but like I think that it's, when it's going through of objects. So what it actually will keep in a variable all of the namespaces of the objects that it's currently applying. And if none of those namespaces is where objects were previously applied, then they get orphaned. They don't get cleaned up. And this is a function of how you call, how you do a call to the cluster using labels. You have to specify the namespace. And so we have to try to keep track of these namespaces based on what's currently being applied. And so there's some really sharp edges there that don't work. But as far as in a namespace itself, cluster scoped objects I don't think have that problem.
Okay, I think I see what you mean. My second question would be, since we're talking about compatibility with server side apply as a potential driving factor, does the experimental implementation, do you think there are any barriers for it to be compatible with server side apply, notably in terms of like the ability to have a custom actor instead of a single like static apply agent?
So I actually think that the two are relatively orthogonal, that like server-side apply pruning and client-side apply pruning, I think that they're pretty, they don't really affect each other that much. I still think, and I could be wrong, I think that the pruning code in our current apply doesn't really care whether or not it was client-side applied or server-side applied. I could be wrong, but that's what I think.
So I guess the question is more if you are trying to use I forget what the field name is, or sorry, the flag name, but server-side apply, you can use it for multiple actors. It's not just
The field manager
controller. You could use it from multiple kubectl invocations, and there's some flag that lets you say who you're being, I guess, right?
Yeah, the field manager. Yep.
Field manager. There we go. Is it compatible with that? Like if you're different
Yes.
field managers, do you get different prune tracking objects?
No. So with the new implementation, it's completely orthogonal. So the pruning happens regardless of how you applied the objects, because we have this inventory object that has references to determine, and it doesn't, all it really cares about is that it is in the cluster, so that it knows we could calculate the set difference and try to delete it, but it doesn't care how it got in the cluster, client side or server side.
Right,
So
but
those-
I'm talking about ownership more than necessarily like pipeline strictly. So if I'm actor A and I'm server side applying something, in the same way that I might want to own specific fields, I probably only want to own specific object sets, and say like I'm a
Right.
controller and I generate more objects.
So
and I
yeah,
wanna
so
use-
this is actually one of the areas that we need to iron out before we'd say that we had anything that we could show to anybody like that works well. And that's, how do you, you're right, how do you share inventory objects? And the way we do that now is if the inventory ID is the same, then, as long as you have RBAC permissions on reading that object, then you could say that you own it.
Mm.
So there's definitely work that needs to be done there, but when you apply a set of objects with this new experimental CLI utils prune, one of them is the inventory object with this special label. And if it turns out that somebody else had pulled out the code in Git and it has that same label, then it's going to use that exact same inventory object as the kind of this grouping object, the object to keep track of what has been applied.
Okay, interesting stuff. Seems like
Yeah,
there's
so
a lot
it
to
doesn't-
dig into here.
Yeah, it's this got a little bit more involved than I thought it would. I was just going to try to say, hey, we're doing a prune experiment over here, but these are all great questions, and we recognize that the documentation is not up to speed, and it should be. There'd be decent enough documentation that these questions would be answered, and the fact that I have to answer them, it really points to the fact that we haven't done a good job with the documentation, and we recognize that.
One more question, if I can.
Sure, of course.
If we think it's years out to improving this, maybe that's a good argument to get started and see if we can get anywhere at all. But I'm very interested in this topic myself, as you might have gleaned.
Okay.
But also, if it's years out to having a solution, do you think we need to do something on the server-side apply existing flag compatibility side in the meantime?
That's a good question that I think I need to think about, and I'd like to dig into the code actually too. It's been a little while since I've been into the apply prune code. I do know that we've done, this is tangential, but I know that we've done refactoring so that the pruning now in the apply is a hook. So you could either turn off pruning by, first of all, you have to use a prune flag, but I think that there's the ability to hook in a new set of code for pruning. in our current apply.
Interesting.
But again, I need to revisit the apply code. And so before I would definitively answer any of these kind of deep questions, I think I should dig into the code in a more thorough fashion. So is it, how about if I set something up for the next meeting, or if, if we think that this isn't interesting to everybody else, then we could just do it on Slack. Or we could do it on Slack, and then, whatever we've learned and whatever conclusions we've come to, we could bring back to the SIG CLI. How about that?
Yeah, or even gather interest on Slack and have another call specifically dedicated to that topic, just as a one-off.
Yep.
I'm definitely interested in this topic and in working on whatever plans to move forward and it making sense.
Yep. So I'm going to put a little note here. I'll dig deeper into that. Okay, so maybe we could get back to the first topic, and I'm gonna give it to Katrina.
Could we actually do the second one first, the
Sure, of
customized
course.
roadmap? And could you open that up for us, please?
Let me put these in the order we're interested in. So you want to do the customized roadmap first? Sounds good.
Yeah, that would be great. Yeah, could you open up the link, please?
Sure. So is that visible now?
Yes.
Okay.
Perfect. So Customized Maintainers, which is Natasha and I, have been working on revamping the roadmap together. And this is our plan for 2022, which we wanted to share with all of you to get your feedback. And we're going to merge this to the repo in a markdown file, just like we did last year. But in the meantime, we have that in this Google Doc in an easy to comment on format, which to get access, you just need to be a member of the SIG CLI mailing list, which presumably we all are already. So just to outline what we have quickly here, we have 3 objectives, which you can kind of see on the sidebar here. Same kind of organization we used last time, which is tasks that improve the contributor experience, tasks that improve the end user experience, and then tasks that improve the extension experience, which is kind of our 3 buckets of customers, if you will, as customized. And the way that we're developing this roadmap, we have a really small team right now on the customized side. So this is sort of a mixture of ambition and realism as to what we would like to get done this year. And we've organized it in terms of our top priority, any secondary priorities that we have, and then other things that we would really, really like, but realistically with the team that we have now, we don't expect to get done ourselves. But if we're able to grow the team, if we have other contributors showing up and excited to help us, these are things that we would love for them to get involved in and that we will really support in like providing training, providing code review as a priority if we get PRs for these things. So that's sort of explaining the organizational principles that we're using in developing this roadmap. So do we want to look at it in detail, or is that not interesting to everybody? I'm happy to go over it, but I don't want to take up too much time.
We could go over it at a high level if you like. I mean, we've got what, 35 more minutes, and I think we only have 1 or 2 other items on here. So I think you could go into it in whatever detail you're comfortable with.
Okay, can you scroll down then a little bit? Maybe I'll do
Sure.
Contributor community here. Natasha, if you could explain the end user experience when we get there, and then I'll go to extensions just so I'm not talking continuously. So for contributor community, our top priority is working towards, we don't necessarily expect to release this, but working towards releasing a customization v1. So customization being the API type of that central object that Customize operates against. It's been in v1 beta 1 for forever. And there are some breaking changes that we want to make eventually. So the plan here would be we release the customized v1. We have this migrate command that helps users convert from one thing to the other wherever possible, which usually is. And then for a period there, the customized CLI would support both the V1 object and the V1 API, V1 beta 1 object as part of a long deprecation. So the objective here isn't to actually fully switch over here or even necessarily to complete it, but to do all of this work that we've been having in mind to get towards that goal. So there's a bunch of details there that I won't go into. The second priority that we have is to improve the contributor documentation, notably in terms of simple instructions to upgrade, customize, and keep control, because that is now a thing that is possible and fairly easy. So just taking opportunity to help improve the documentation, because we know that there are big gaps there and we really need more people to join us, and we want to make that easier, basically. So if you could scroll down a little bit. And finally, so also very valuable. These are things that like we don't expect to have time to work on with the team that we have today helping us out. But we recognize that we really need to improve the release process over the long term. It takes maintainers to do it. It's not as automated as that could be. Some improvements that we have in mind in the linked issues. And then we also have sort of related to the customization V1 project. There's also a customized API, which is the thing that kubectl and other tools that build sort of custom versions of Kustomize rely on, which is also not at 1.0 yet. And that is actually a very pretty well-defined set of approachable tasks that involve reducing the public surface. The API module is a big one. So that's something that I think would be a fairly approachable task for somebody to come help us with. So that's kind of an interesting aspect there. And then we, under project administration, if we have a chance to rename the master branch to Maine, which is something that the community is looking to do for our repos overall, but it involves a fair amount of toil and careful sequencing of operations. All right, so Natasha, end user experience.
Sure. So the end user experience objective has been informed by bugs that have been filed by users over the last few months. So our top priority is to fix the most common bugs, most notably the basic anchor support. There are multiple issues regarding that. So we'd like to fix that along with the other issues listed here. And then the next few top priorities are highly requested features. So sending the customized CLI version number into kubectl through a kubectl command, improving customized performance, and then supporting generic resource references. Currently, the way we track name references is very limited, and it's causing a lot of bugs with name references being updated where they shouldn't be. So we'd like to fix that. And then lastly, we have it kept out for a debugging feature to allow an option to add resource origin and transformer information for each resource, so that a user can trace how their resource has been transformed throughout the customization stack. And then under our second priorities, first we have that we would like to release customized CLI v5. This is highly dependent on the customization v1 project. So in Customize v5, we are going to drop a bunch of flags in favor of fields that we're adding to the customization, as well as drop support for Customization v1 beta. And so we're not sure that we're going to get to this, but we would like to make as much progress as possible. And then the other secondary priority is a very popular issue, confusion around namespace replacement. We'd like to add some options to the namespace transformer rather than adding the namespace to every single resource, because users are confused about how do I skip a certain resource, or why is it being set when there's already a namespace. So we'd like to make that more clear. And then other things that are very valuable to the project. Generally, we'd like to improve error messages. Our errors are very verbose and confusing. And then there are a few other features here that we've listed. Yeah. Back to you, Katrina.
Yeah, so our last section is improving the extension experience. We sort of talked about this at Jeff and I talked about this a bit at KubeCon, the plan that we've developed to promote the use of KRM functions as extensions and deprecate older versions of extension mechanisms, improve the way that KRM functions work today and ultimately make extensions work the same way in Customized and Kube Control as in Customized Standalone. So we have a whole KEP outlining basically what this objective is all about, if you're interested in the details. And we really just want to make sure that we are making some big progress towards the ambitious goals that we have there over the course of the year. And the first step is that we want to promote care and function extensions as the way to build things, but there are some significant usability issues with them. So the first thing to do is to fix those, in my opinion. So that's top priority. And then after that is done, then we'll be able to confidently say, like, you should really only be building this and be able to deprecate all of the older styles. And then the final top priority is the catalog KEP, which is being worked on in conjunction with the care and function subproject, because that is our way of sort of making functions shareable and reusable and having a really seamless experience for organizations and even for us to be able to make first party extensions that actually sort of feel customized native. So that's really important part of the longer term plan, that as much as we can get done on that this year, the better. The secondary priorities are a composition KEP, which is implementation complete, but it's sort of an alternative orchestration model that puts third-party transformers, so like the operations that you can do, it puts the third-party ones on the same footing as the first-party ones that are compiled into Customize, which opens up a bunch of really neat use cases. But since that's completely novel, that's why it's a secondary priority. The implementation is actually complete, but there's some significant surgery that needs to be done to Customize itself in order to make it useful, which I won't go into the details, but they're outlined there. And finally, we need some better docs for the extension libraries. So any contributions there are going to be super valuable to us. And we have a couple other priorities there. So the reserved field for plugin runtime information, we don't know for sure if we're going to need that until we finish the catalog KEP. And the standard process for implementing built-in transformers has to do with the deprecation of the Go plugin style, because we're actually using that internally. So we want to start setting the example of what this should look like ourselves as well. So that will be once we set the standard, also a set of good, well-defined tasks for folks to help. Any questions?
Katrina, are you, so specific ask, are you looking for new contributors, and do we have the bandwidth to mentor them?
We are definitely looking for new contributors. We're really challenged on bandwidth, to be perfectly honest.
Mm-hmm.
But assuming the contributors touch base with us about what is valuable to the project, for instance, the stuff on the roadmap, we're hoping that will help by having these priorities explicitly outlined. We will prioritize training folks, because we really need to have more folks on the team with us helping maintain Customize for the long term. Cool. So if you're starting to contribute, please be patient with us, but we do super value your help, and we will we will promise to help you out and help you on board to the project.
There's a separate Customize meeting, right? Or is that just the bug scrub?
There is a Customized bug scrub it's monthly. And there is an informal sort of stand-up Customized meeting that you can be invited to once you start contributing. We could formalize that as an official SIG meeting using this call if that's the direction we want to go with it. It's just extremely informal at this point.
Great. Well, thanks for sharing that with us. That's really useful for us, I think, all to see what the direction. And so you're next on the agenda as well. Circling back to the rollback undo with the client side last applied annotation. So does somebody want
yeah,
to?
we can discuss that now. I feel like I'm dominating the agenda. So like if you want to take yours first, since this is also a topic we've already discussed last week, I think that could make sense.
Oh, so should we do Eddie's then first? Is that what you're suggesting?
Yeah, I'm
Okay,
just
great.
suggesting that. I feel like I've been talking and talking today.
We'll
Okay.
give you a little break there.
Yeah, I'll give you a break. Sean, can I share my screen, please?
Yes. Do I need to stop sharing mine?
I think so.
Okay. There.
Okay. Y'all see this okay?
Yes.
Cool. So Lau had to leave early, but he asked me to talk through his open PR here. So for some background, if you do a kube control get help, you're presented with a pretty thick condensed wall of text for the help flags. This is really hard to glance at. It's really hard to make sense of. And I think users that miss a lot of flags, I think this contributes to that, right? So Lau took it on himself to go out and open a PR that improves the help flags. And we're pretty much at a bike shedding moment now. So we have a few different options to talk through. They're all good. They all have pros and cons. And we just need to figure out which one we want to move forward with, and we can get this shipped. So again, this is what we currently have for help flags. Lau's PR currently does this. So he took this as like a 2-column approach. So we have the flag name on the left and then the description on the right. So this definitely looks a lot better. Some issues with this are kind of how the calculation is done in terms of how big these columns are. So if we get a really long flag, things might start to look a little wonky. They do some like weird wrapping if they need to. URLs here. One of the things I pointed out to him, so before he was kind of wrapping the URL in this column here, but that kind of breaks being able to click this as a user. And I think that's a really important thing for your terminal to be able to do, is to like correctly click a URL so you can pop to it, as opposed to like, you know, copying part of it here and copying part of it there. So this is an interesting kind of caveat here in terms of how do we make enough space for the URL. There are a couple other bits in here. There were some certain characters that wrapped weird. Copy pasting was the big one, and clickable URLs, right? So we want to be able to copy paste. If there's specific examples in here, we want to be able to copy paste them out of this. So this was the one approach. We can try to talk about how to do this, like URLs better, where we want them to wrap to. And then another suggestion was Brian had for a review was something like this. So this is sort of how man pages do it. So we can kind of bring down the description here, take up the whole space, and then kind of add just some extra lines here for padding, so it's a little more readable. So for example, if I do like man get, like this is kind of what the man pages will look like. So I'll stop there. Does anyone have thoughts, preferences, comments, suggestions?
The latter approach is much more preferable, because the former, if you end up in a, I don't know, weird environment where your terminal will be literally 80 characters long, the former approach will make it unreadable in cases where, and we do have some messy long flags. I think that I commented in a similar vein on that PR that it would be pretty cool to do it this way rather than, oh, yeah, well, mine was close but I like the proposal from Brian much more. It is, first of all, it's something that people are already familiar with, going through man pages. And secondly, you can quickly, you are maintaining all of the readability that is lacking from the first approach.
Yeah. Any other thoughts? And this is sort of a standard terminal wrapping type scenario. This is where like lines and columns do different breaking things. So, yeah.
Is that the only issue with this PR?
No, this is just in general. Like this is like a standard terminal wrapping scenario. This is like some syscalls that give you the terminal width.
No. I was asking about if the problem of 2-column versus man-like approach is the only issue to close this particular PR.
Yeah, basically, we just all need to agree on an approach. I agree with you. I really like Brian's take. So if that's what everyone feels cool about, I can let Lau know, and we can get this done.
I would just go with that,
I agree.
unless someone wants to complain and object me. I'm inclined to overrule on that one.
Cool. Okay, that sounds good. So we'll give this a shot. We'll see what this looks like, and we'll get it shipped. Shout out to Lau, who had to leave early.
Cool. Thanks thanks. Tell Lau thanks for that. That actually is pretty cool, if you ask me. Did I
All
lose
right, so
anybody?
back to me then.
Yep.
All right, so this is a topic that we discussed last week. If you were there or if you watched the recording, we promised that we would circle back to the conversation. So that's what we're doing now. This issue, if you could click on it, Sean, just so we have the topic visible, is a bug report from users about kube control, rollout, undo, not doing what they expect. It's what they expect is that it's going to take the target object and it's going to roll back to the previous revision, and then from there on out they're fine. But what actually happens is an imperative replacement of the spec under the hood, which is not actually rolling. So it's only rolling back part of it, essentially. It's rolling back the spec to the previous replica set. It's not rolling back all of the annotations. And notably, that includes it's not rolling back the last implied configuration annotation, which means that if you do a rollback and then you roll forward to something else and there's any change in field management, any of the versions that are impacted, your next apply is going to have, let's say, unexpected results. And that's what this issue is describing, is a way to reproduce those unexpected results. The stance that we're considering here is that this doesn't work, because if you're using apply, then none of the other commands that mutate are expected to have predictable behavior. If you are using apply, you're all in on apply, declarative management, and all the other commands are considered imperative and not compatible. My empathy for the user in this case, though, is like really tugging at my heartstrings here. Like, I really understand why they don't think this sounds unsafe. It sounds like an emergency tool, really. And it, like, on the face of it, it's promising to roll back an object, and like we totally could, like, it's totally possible to actually track the history and actually do that rollback. It's not impossible. They're not like thinking that we're like promising a miracle here. Like it's doable. That makes me a little uncomfortable with like refusing to make it work. Something that sounds like an emergency tool, refusing to make it work on principle. And so I really want to understand the risks that we think would accompany fixing this. If we decide to take a hardline stance on it, on not fixing it, like maybe discuss alternatives as to how we can make folks not trip over it. For example, like we could totally block using this with apply, right? We can tell that the object was applied, it's got that annotation. We could just make the command say nope. Like, are we comfortable doing that? Anyway, just throwing out observations.
So just as a quick note, we kind of went down that path with when you apply an object that has been created, so it doesn't have the last applied annotation. We used to throw a fatal error and say, you can't apply this because it was not applied with apply. Now I think it's a warning. So if you create an object with kubectl create, the imperative command versus kind of the declarative apply, that we kind of know that these two, and we've kind of tried to warn that these two don't mix well. Another thing to note is that for a couple of the imperative commands, there is the -- save config flag for both create and edit. You can actually manually say, okay, I know you're an imperative command, but I'm going to keep the last apply. I'm going to store the last applied annotation. That's what that flag means for create and edit. So yeah, so I'll let Maciej.
Yeah, so the problem and the difference between the imperative and declarative command is pretty distinct. And the fact that we started, the majority of the kubectl commands is, or still are, imperative because that's how we started the entire thing. Apply and the idea of declarative approach emerged over time. And if you are applying a proper GitOps where the source of truth is only one, and that's your Git repo, and then you have a CI/CD pipeline which manages everything, which is good for auditing purposes because you have a clear history of what has changed, who has changed, and you can quickly manage the user permissions. And I was discussing this with Katrina, I think last or 2 weeks ago, and we had a rather lively discussion on the topic. But after thinking through it, I think what we can do is to do two things. One, we should probably work on a blog post explaining the differences, or maybe that could be also a good SIG CLI topic for KubeCon EU, where we would clearly describe the differences of using imperative versus declarative command, and the approach, and most importantly, the dangers if you are mixing. As long as you're within the imperative and you use once declarative, you should be good. But if generally you're in a declarative approach, any single usage of imperative command, because that is only probably one command, and if you use, I don't know, set image or set volumes, I think we have also a couple of sets, and if you use one of those, it's better you have auditing on the API server enabled. Otherwise, you won't be able to get down to who modified a particular resource, which is a danger by itself. So on one hand, it is our responsibility to teach the users about the risk of using both of them. At the same time, we would have to double check because maybe the fact that this particular annotation isn't rolled back during rollout undo, maybe there's a strong argument why it is so. I haven't checked.
I tried to look that up in the history, and the answer seemed to be that if you just the implementation is copying stuff from replica set to deployment, right? So if you just copy this over, that would make apply think it owned replica set. So for pruning, for example, that would be a disaster, not a good idea. So when they're implementing this, they're just like, oh, well, we should exclude that annotation. So that's how it happened. It just got excluded for that reason. But like we could work around that, right? You don't have to copy it with the same name, etc. Server-side apply doesn't even use that same annotation. But yeah.
So it properly excludes it on the rollout, but doesn't give the annotation back when it does the rollout undo.
Yeah, because we've lost it at that point. It's gone.
Correct.
The one from the previous replica set. It doesn't have to be. We could totally keep it, but we don't.
Maybe then the approach would be to do something similar to what we did with create, where you have an explicit way of setting save config, as in, well, I'm fully aware of the dangers and just, do it because I'm aware, and don't do it automatically. That would be probably a reasonable approach as well.
The problem with the data getting lost, though, that happens at replica set creation time, though. Like when they're doing the roll and undo, it's already gone. So we couldn't adding a flag there wouldn't help. Where do you have in mind?
But when we are losing the flag
On the rollout,
after doing
the minus save config on the rollout.
No, not on the rollout. Like once we're doing the rollout, sorry, the rollout undo. Sorry for interrupting. It's on the roll forward to the next version. The next time they apply. Sorry, trying to phrase this in a way that will make sense. So when you do an apply, you have the last applied configuration there, right? You do your next apply, you get the next last applied configuration. That's never propagated anywhere else. So once you are trying to do the undo, what's going to happen is it's going to go look at the old replica set and grab its spec and put it back into the deployment. But the old last applied isn't there. Like there's nowhere to grab it from, because when that replica set was created in the first place, it didn't get the annotation synced down. So there's no record of the last applied that corresponds.
so all of the rollouts were done with apply.
Yeah.
But the rollback was done with a rollout undo.
Yeah, that's the idea. That's what the situation is describing. Which is like, so to your point about documentation, I think that's a great idea and giving a talk. And we do have a page on declarative versus imperative, but I was actually digging around here to try and see like what we're presenting to users as it is. And most of the tutorials about how to do stuff, they mix declarative and imperative commands and just like how they're showing you do things. If you look up how to roll back a Kubernetes deployment, how to roll back a Kubernetes whatever object, you'll find not only our own docs, but other people's blog posts saying to use rollout undo, which is totally understandable, I think, under the circumstances that we have right now. So I'm not sure that would be sufficient communication to prevent people from running into a situation like this. And like, for example, our commands, like we do kubectl help, which we were just looking at, it's not organized in terms of declarative and imperative either, right? So we're not really helping people understand what's supposed to be used together as it stands.
So maybe it would be better to help people differentiate between these two commands, because I'm feeling that we're trying to fix a problem that is not there. As long as you use rollout to roll the app and then rollout undo, fine. But you roll out through apply, and then you're trying to entirely break the flow and do something that it was not meant to do. I know that the docs are not accurate, and we should probably just work on docs and improving that.
I think that there are almost two issues here. Like we absolutely should improve the docs and the declarative versus imperative in general, like for sure, helping people understand that and like the consequences of trying to mix them, etc. Absolutely worthwhile. But this specific command, I think it's not clear to the end user coming from either of those flows that it will or won't work with either, because it totally could. And
so the next thing next to the doc, it will be good to review our commands and add those warnings that Sean was talking. Not sure where we have them already. And the pieces that are missing should inform user that if, well, you've used apply, be sure that you will break your flow by using an imperative command.
Do you think it would be, for example, in this case here, like if we, would it make sense to go as far as requiring explicit confirmation if we detect that there's an apply annotation on it?
No, I would just put a warning there.
Okay.
I wouldn't stop it, but I would warn. The problem with introducing any kind of confirmation or a breaking change is facing the problem that we will break user workflows. A lot of the kubectl commands are being used in CI pipelines already. And if something was working and suddenly just stops without too much information, I know that people will be.
Just to play devil's advocate on that argument, though, if people are already using it successfully this way with apply, which is the specific situation that I'm talking about warning on, then shouldn't we fix it for them to not be dangerous if we want to support that and are not willing to break it?
I mean, I do hope that they are not using rollout in their pipelines, but still, I'm pretty positive that each and every single one of us was in a situation where there was a panic mode and, well, I have to do it by hand right away. But my personal suggestion to that person would be, yeah, we'll try to do apply once again with fixed whatever that you were working on or changing, rather than the rollout.
What happens if we delete the annotation as part of undo?
It would be bugging more often.
Okay.
Yeah. I'm not sure it's a consistent stance if we're saying like we're not willing to work to break people using it this way, but we're also not willing to make it safe to use this way. I'm happy with the warning though, at least as something to help people realize. And maybe if we had that blog post, we could address this case specifically, like here's what happened. And like the warning could even link to it saying like, here's how to investigate what's going to go wrong on your next deploy.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, so I guess I'll respond on the issue with that conclusion. I would still personally rather fix it, but I do think that I'm outnumbered on that stance. So I'll defer to the group and go with that consensus.
Thank you for fighting for the user, Katrina.
Yeah. Thanks for keeping us honest here and bringing it up, keeping it, yeah. Keeping it in the
Sorry for being
headlines.
a pain.
So I think we're about 1 minute over. And so why don't we close the meeting? And I hope everybody has a good day. So is there any final words before we all take off here? Nope. Okay. Have a good day.
Bye. Have a good day.